This means ensuring that A vehicles and B vehicles are held separately and do not approach the wrong crossing point. This can be difficult if harbour areas are in limited supply. Heavy vehicles are often only able to cross an obstacle one at a time, and therefore control at this point is vital to prevent too many vehicles entering into the crossing point area. Once into packets, vehicles will be marshalled towards their allotted assembly area. It is here where they will be released to the entry line as per the timings allotted on the movements table. Once they have passed through the entry line, they will move into the crossing area. The crossing area is designated by the DivCom. It contains a number of crossing sites, and it provides the commander with the flexibility to switch traffic from one crossing site to another. A crossing area is bounded by an entry line and release line. Whilst in the crossing area, they are controlled by the Crossing Area HQ. This HQ is responsible for the control, coordination and detailed planning for the crossing area. This will usually be delegated to the battle group undertaking the crossing. The Crossing Area HQ will call forward troops from waiting areas and control and coordinate their movement within the crossing area. Military police co-located within the crossing area headquarters are to ensure that control of their allotted section of the route is maintained. Military police are to also liaise with vehicle commanders to ensure that as per the road movement table, the packet is adhering to timings and if necessary to hold the packet. The packet is on the correct allotted route and that all vehicles within the packet are supposed to be there. Military police are also to maintain communication within their section of the route, making sure that all information is passed. Additionally, working with the MCC, they are to divert packets through defiles or delay vehicles if there are any issues along the route. The Crossing Site HQ. The movement of troops and equipment at a crossing point must be strictly controlled to ensure effectiveness and efficiency, minimising exposure to enemy observation and fire. Military police will establish a close liaison with the Crossing Area HQ and subordinate crossing site HQs, and may assist by conducting route signalling, traffic control, regulation and marshalling at crossing points to maintain momentum and avoid congestion. An additional holding area is set up at a crossing point. This is established to allow military police to marshal vehicles towards and onto the crossing point. This also enables vehicles to be concealed if there is any delay whilst crossing. Once called up, vehicles will be marshalled towards the crossing point. The crossing site commander will normally be a Royal Engineer and will be responsible for development of the crossing site and its maintenance. The crossing point. Restrictions on crossing bridges are governed by the physical characteristics and dimensions of the bridge and the type of vehicle, and not by whether a vehicle is wheeled or tracked or classed as an A or B vehicle. Military police located here will continue to marshal the vehicles down the path to the correct location, handing over the vehicles to the Royal Engineers at a predetermined point. Diversions and detours require thorough prior planning, and the platoon should identify and plan to enact potential detours away from a bridge in case the bridge or its approaches become either unusable or have been damaged. This may take the form of either moving the packets away from the obstacle and back onto the MSR, like this, which would mean putting them back into waiting areas further up the route, or along axle routes in order to cross at another crossing point. However, this course of action could cause further issues, especially if other crossing points are either not capable of taking the extra packets due to the quantity of packets already waiting to cross, or the bridge is not capable of taking the MLC of the new packets. Prior planning and good communication is key to the detour being a success. Far bank operations. RMP will resume responsibility of the vehicles once they have passed through the Royal Engineer position at the bridgehead. We will need to move the vehicles to another harbour or waiting area, which is used as a FUP or form-up point. Vehicles in this location should amalgamate back into their packets or columns before moving off onto the route as dictated in the movement order. How we do it. An obstacle should be treated as a defile. Most obstacles require a form of traffic control. The size of this control varies from the simple action of a pointsman at each end of the defile to a complex operation involving many resources. The principles and techniques laid down here may be adopted for any form of obstacle that is likely encountered. The key to commanding and working within an obstacle crossing site is communication and control. Use of harbours is key, not just at the bridging site, but all the way along the route to prevent too many vehicles being stacked up in one place and becoming an easy target. Normal crossing is a one carried out in accordance with the Associated Equipment Support Publication, or the ASP. Bridge designs are based on vehicles crossing in convoy and no less than 30 metres spacing. Crossing speeds for vehicles up to and including military load classification 30 must be a maximum of 40 km an hour. The maximum speed of vehicles exceeding MLC 30 is reduced to 25 km an hour. Caution crossings are to be conducted with only one vehicle on the bridge at any one time, at a reduced speed of 8 km an hour, unless otherwise stated in the Army Engineers Safety Policy. The additional limitations of ensuring that braking is kept to a minimum and that vehicles remain central to the roadway are also imposed. Vehicles must only pass one way whilst passing over the bridge. Risk crossings are to be conducted with only one vehicle on the bridge at any one time, with the limitations imposed as for a caution crossing. A risk crossing imposes the absolute maximum load before permanent deformation or collapse, or both, of the bridge occurs. Any bridges employed for a risk crossing must be taken out of service immediately and subjected to a full and rigorous inspection before reuse. A risk crossing must only be used in case of extreme necessity on operations. When marshalling vehicles over the obstacle, military police are to give consideration for the type of crossing which is being carried out and the vehicles which are crossing, as this will affect how vehicle packets are called up. Military police marshalling vehicles over the obstacle should only remain out in the open when marshalling vehicles. At all other times they should conceal themselves to minimise the threat on them. To avoid congestion and vehicles waiting in the open when conducting a caution and risk crossing, vehicles are to be located in a nearby holding area and called up and marshalled over one by one. Once vehicles have passed over the obstacle, they will be marshalled into a nearby holding area controlled by military police. This allows vehicles to regroup into their allotted packets without congesting the route. Once complete, vehicle packets will move off towards the release line. The best way to describe the whole process is like an upturned hourglass. Each grain of sand in the hourglass represents a vehicle that needs to pass over the obstacle, or in the case of the hourglass, passing through the neck of the two glass bulbs. The neck represents the constraints of the obstacle, preventing the sand moving to the opposite bulb as a whole, the same as a bridge, and slowing the movement down. This process is time consuming and requires command and control at every stage. As more sand passes into the opposite bulb, the RMP will need to be ready to move the vehicles back onto the routes and towards their objectives. The military police should consider the following factors: movement of Royal Engineers and other resources to assembly areas and forward of the obstacle, movement of formations and units to assembly areas and onwards through the obstacle, the ability to divert traffic to alternate routes or harbour areas if necessary, the segregation of types of vehicle to specialised crossing points, i.e. tracked or wheel-based vehicles, the control of traffic returning over the obstacle, the maintenance of the correct density to allow uninterrupted movement through the obstacle. Planning and control at the obstacle is essentially a Royal Engineer responsibility. However, close liaison must be achieved between the engineers and military police at all levels of planning and operation. The military police is responsible for the following: signing and traffic posts on approach routes, at assembly areas and routes forward of the obstacles, regulation of traffic density on the approach routes and the enforcement of speed restrictions, the erection of weight and dimension restriction signs on the approach routes to allow for a diversion before the obstacle, plan and sign a physical diversion for prohibited traffic, relaying information to all other traffic posts and road users. The Royal Engineer tasks are as follows. The Royal Engineers will clear the obstacle or erect a bridge, sign through the obstacle lane or at the bridge, light the carriageway at the obstacle, provide notification of closure of routes for repairs, provide advice on speed and density restrictions, provide vehicle classification restrictions. Considerations. Throughout the obstacle crossing, commanders are to give consideration to how much manpower taskings will use. When considering where military police will be utilised, the following considerations will have to be thought out. Firstly, the size of the RMP ORBAT which you have been given for the task. The Military Police Handbook Part 2 states that the Royal Military Police will require a platoon consisting of 8 vehicles to conduct a brigade obstacle crossing. However, if the crossing is given a high priority, more Royal Military Police assets could be used. Secondly, commanders must plan for any other tasks which may arise out of the obstacle crossing and how this will impact the manning which they have. Additionally, commanders will have to plan on an increased CBRN threat within the crossing area will affect their ORBAT, their actions at the crossing points, and the adherence to the movement order. Useful but sparing deployment of the reserve section could be used to supplement, relieve, or provide support to the ongoing task.